As promised, we're going to have a session today, this afternoon, to follow through on the presentations that we started earlier. Now you know who these fine people are, work they're doing, resources that are available, and we're going to have a discussion. Where can we go from here? What do we need to do to make Florida a more bicycle pedestrian friendly state? And I think as you found out today, it already is a much more bicycle pedestrian friendly state than most people think. I think a lot that really has to be debated at this point is how accurate is the data? Because as you can tell, we already have some of the most bicycle friendly programs in the country. And that's not just a matter of bias. I've worked with local governments and states all over the country. I know we have some good programs, both in education, planning, design, engineering. What can we do to make this work for us? Now, just to throw the first volley, the first serve, Ron Cunningham would like to start off the discussion.
Is this on? I wanted to exercise the organizer's prerogative, since I paid for the microphone, and I was an editorial writer for 30 years before I got into the bicycle business, and so we editorial writers like to deal in the vision thing. And so as I was thinking about organizing this event, particularly the safety forum, I started to look a lot at what Sweden was doing with their Vision Zero initiative. And of course, since then, they got very aggressive. Sweden just basically decided that no traffic fatality was acceptable, and there had to be a way to address that in a comprehensive manner. That incremental reforms weren't enough. New York City just embraced Vision Zero. They're doing some really dramatic things. San Francisco has now got a Vision Zero plan, and so I would like to throw it out as a challenge to this panel. Why not Vision Zero for Florida?
Well, I think that, again, when you think about the idea of context, the context that you're operating in Sweden and New York City are very different than the vast majority of our state. And so in the cities where you have the opportunity to be more aggressive with those kinds of things, then that goal would obviously be something that would be more reasonably achievable. But so much of what we've built with suburban land development patterns, and we have people commuting long distances to try to tame that animal within the constraints of what the department can do would be virtually impossible. I mean, it's certainly something that we want to reduce. Every death is a loss, and is important to try to remove those statistics. But to get to that point, I mean, certainly that's a goal we'd love to have, but it's a huge effort. Just moving the dial on what we're doing with this agency right now is more than I think most state DOTs are doing across the country. So let's get that started, and then we can focus on the next level.
I think some of it goes to understand the cause of it. I believe what you're doing is excellent work, but I also wonder whether there aren't other places in the system that I'm not convinced we've looked at this as a systemic problem. We've looked at the DOT as one contributor in the system. But using a different example, I know many years ago, working with Pinellas County, they found something as simple as changing their land development code to make it easier for pedestrians to get from a street to the front entrance of stores made a world of difference in safety. And that's an example where I don't even think the planning profession is doing anything with it. I think we really, in order for this to be effective, I think we need to really get, and this is maybe a challenge to the Florida Bicycle Association, begin to think systematically, and actually the other is the pedestrian world is, the results I showed, there's many ways in which bicyclists and pedestrians are similar in that they're both vulnerable road users, but there are many aspects where they're very different, and I don't think we have, and this seems to be a good role for the advocacy the community to really begin to look at and begin to think, not just DOT, you're not doing your job, but city of, you name it, every single community in the state to say, and the planning profession, the school board, everybody up and down the line. I've been doing a lot of work on school siting. And we put schools, this county recently built a school halfway between Alachua and Newberry. And literally 100% of the children on buses. And yes, buses are safer for children than any other mode that we could get them to come to school. Although the parents who happen to live within 2 miles of that school are going to drive them, contributing to congestion in our communities. The cost to the community, does it surprise you? The state of Florida spends almost $1 billion per year to bus children, to bus less than 50% of our children to school. So that's what I'm saying is we really need a broad, I'm bringing that one in because it's from my other research, but we're really often looking at the short-term capital cost of doing things and not spending enough time looking at the long-range operations, maintenance, external costs to the community and individual costs to families and the driving public.
Well, I'd like to share, I guess, a traffic engineering perspective. One of the most frustrating things when a terrible fatality happens on the roadway, we get calls and people say, well, do something. Change the road, fix this, keep this from happening. And I have to remind people that there's 3 elements to a crash. There's the roadway, there's the vehicle, and there's the drivers. So this isn't just an infrastructure problem, this is a behavioral problem. Now, if all the people who operated on our roadways followed the rules of the road and followed the laws and drove defensively, we would never have any. Of course, that's a big if. It's just not going to happen. So having the infrastructure there, having the roads there is only part of the piece. Changing the behavior is really what needs to happen. And there's various ways to help that happen. You can educate the population in a positive way with training classes, or you can educate them in a negative way by giving them tickets and enforcing it. But really, it's such a deep question. How do you get to 0 fatalities? It takes a wholesale culture change. And this is a culture of our citizens, of our engineers, of our law enforcement, of our legal system. It's a very deep, deep question. And it's actually promising what I've been seeing because that's the direction we're heading. But it's a long road in the future to get there.
I just wanted to follow up on Ruth's comments. I couldn't agree more with everything that she said. And what you saw today is a very short version of what I give, especially when I speak to local governments and MPOs. I'll be making metropolitan planning organizations. I'll be at the statewide metropolitan organization meeting, which is all 26 MPOs next month. And I'll be making a presentation that discusses all the other implications, including school siting. We have elementary schools in the Orange County area with 1,000 kids in them, and they're stuck out in the middle of nowhere, and literally every child has to be driven to school. So the issues are very, very large, and I don't think, getting back to the external costs that Ruth mentions, thankfully there's been studies that talk about the tax return on sprawl development patterns in big box stores compared with mixed use development patterns. There's been studies in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Danny Pleasant, who used to be in Orlando, did an analysis, or had his folks do an analysis that showed how fire safety costs are much higher in sprawl development patterns than they are in their downtown areas. There's lots of opportunities to improve things on every front, but it takes time and it takes other people who are willing to tell this message. I have a fairly active group of bike activists in my district, and of course they were routinely complaining about the department's role and problems, and so I went and met with their board and I said, you know, all the things that you're saying are true, but you're not saying anything to your commissioners about your land development patterns, which are the worst land development patterns in my entire district. You need to take that on as well, which they have, by the way.
I noticed the way you said fairly active group of activists.
I was understating the case.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Right here?
I'm struck that in this program, there are no representatives of law enforcement.
Use the mic.
I can probably talk louder.
We need to record it.
Are you recording? Well, again, I'm struck by the fact that there are no law enforcement people here. What do we do about the police community that seems to, one, not know the law in a lot of cases, two, not enforce it, and three, seem to hold a certain negative attitude towards cyclists? And when there is a collision, often assume that it's the cyclist's fault, and often cite the cyclist incorrectly.
That we recognize that problem as well, and our coalition, which I mentioned in the slide presentation, we have both the state Florida Association of Police Chiefs and the Florida Association of Sheriffs actively involved in this problem, and they have just recently released roll call videos that talk about what are the primary causes for crashes with bicyclists and pedestrians, and also explain to law enforcement what the laws are and what are the right behaviors to try to help address those issues. Obviously, when we get the laws rewritten through over this next year or two, we're going to have to go back to them and provide additional education. But I think a lot of it is just the culture, just like we have a culture of design that's designed things a certain way. So we're working to re-educate law enforcement and help them to understand, you know, what are the right behaviors and how they need to deal with these issues of enforcement.
And Billy, I'd also like to add that the Florida Bicycle Association has also produced a bicycle and pedestrian law enforcement guide, and FBA has also produced bicycle law enforcement training videos for their roll call as well. It's been recognized that, and I've been told even by senior law enforcement personnel, that law enforcement doesn't get as much training in traffic as most people assume. And if they get any training at all in traffic, they don't get any training in bicycle and pedestrian laws. And we have FBA staff here if anybody wants to see about getting copies of this material.
And the other thing that they don't get, and I learned this many years ago when I was the state roadway design engineer, because again, I was trying to find out how can we get law enforcement engaged to help improve safety in the state of Florida. They get no training in doing crash analysis. So, you know, they're just reporting based on the way they've been doing it for a very long time, which is primarily for insurance companies and trial attorneys. And we really should be doing a better job of educating them on what are the actual causes and what are the contributing causes.
Steve?
I'm Stephen McKinney-Steck, a cyclist from Oviedo, Florida, and I would second what the other gentleman just said about the absence of law enforcement on this panel, though maybe that wasn't the cause of the panel, so you have to draw a line somewhere in terms of adding another 6 people here. I get that, so I'm not being hostile. But I do wonder whether it's a Department of Transportation issue and an FBA issue as to whether there is any naive possibility of, over a period of a year or two, having 64 counties or 67 counties in Florida and their law enforcement organizations meet in each county one by one to put together a communication opportunity for sheriff's office, city police, to come together with cycling organizations, advocacy organizations in that county and have a one-to-one dialogue about cycling issues as it regards law enforcement and as it regards the cyclist. Has that ever happened, and is it naive to think that's too broad to try to put together? And then I have another question.
Were you directing anybody in specific?
Well, either you two, I would think. I'm not
ahead.
trying to exclude the rest of you, but
Go ahead.
every time I talk to an LEO, FDOT comes up in a conversation. And every time I talk to FDOT, LEOs come up. So it seems to me it's the association and it's the department trying to bring together those four, you two, the cyclist, and the law enforcement, county by county by county, to
Well,
see if we can have an ongoing dialogue.
Well, that's the intent of our work with the coalition. I mean, we have those
The coalition.
groups. Right.
What is the
Bike Ped
coalition?
It's the group that's made up, I mentioned this early in my slideshow, it's made up of all of our sister agencies in the state, including education, highway safety and motor vehicles, the Florida Association of Police Chiefs, the Florida Association of Sheriffs. And so part of the goal is to work through those associations, which reach out to all of these cities and counties that you're referring to help educate them. That's what the roll call videos will do. They'll educate them on the laws, they'll educate them on right behaviors and those kinds of things. I mean, that's the most effective way to get it out there quickly, if you're looking to get that information out there quickly.
And one of the things that FDOT has done well is that in the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Coalition, it's not just individual departments that are represented. They have representatives of the Florida Police Chiefs Association and the Florida Sheriff's Association. And it is their job to get it back to their member organizations, which works much better than trying to target individual police departments, because they all have their own political personality of their own.
Thank you on that question. My second question is, I raised it before, is there any way to more inclusively draw in cyclists who may not be affiliated with FBA, who may not be a member of a club, to be involved in this rewrite and to see it before it goes to the legislature, where it may be too late, to see how you're proposing to reword the statutes or the language or whatever the vehicles are over the next year or two, to try and conform them to user-friendly law that both sides of the equation understand, LEO and the cyclist. Is there a way to be more inclusive?
We have, with our coalition, we have, good Lord, we must have close to 60 people involved in that represent people from all walks of life as it relates to stakeholders. Is it possible to be more inclusive? I'm sure it is, but part of the goal is to get groups that represent large groups that are inclusive to the interests. Certainly, if you have a specific interest, we can show you what's going on. Probably the best way is that we have a website called alerttodayflorida.com, and we can certainly post those proposals on our website and ask the public to comment. alerttodayflorida.com. Everything that we are doing and have done is posted on that website. I mean, there's way more information than I could cover in a half a day.
ALERTTODAYFL or FLA, FLORIDA?
alerttodayflorida.com.
The whole word Florida. Okay. Thank you.
Wondered if anyone has any thoughts on how we balance a very necessary discussion about safety with not discouraging people from becoming pedestrians and bicyclists, because we create at the same time the perception that it's too dangerous to do, knowing that every mode of transportation, including driving, has a lot of danger involved. So how do we have this safety discussion without overwhelming the public into thinking that cycling and walking is deadly?
I would recommend that we frame it into a broader conversation. I think one of the best things that happened in the world of Well, I jokingly say to people, I've been doing this for 25 years, and when I first started, I did bicycle and pedestrian planning, and then I did multimodal planning, and now I do active transportation. Now, and in the meantime, I've really been doing the same thing in multiple venues. But I think emphasizing the health benefits and other benefits for the community associated with bicycling and pedestrian activity is one of the ways to get around that. And to possibly separate the conversation. I mean, I felt a little odd. If you look at this panel, I'm really the only one who dwelt on the safety aspect. All of the others had a message of these are things we're doing to improve the state. And I think that's and there's only so far you can go with what I'm talking about doing. Where everybody's doing all these other things that are really wonderful ways to really promote a balanced message on this topic.
I was just thinking that not scaring the public, you're taking away a valuable tool. You know, we want to remind people that that we do have a problem and they do need to be careful out there. That's a little bit of a joke, but I do think that it's important to encourage walking and bicycling and active transportation, and not focus just on the crashes, but like I was saying earlier, the health benefits, the social benefits, the economic benefits of getting out and walking, that sense of place. And to remind people of the reasons we like going and biking and walking, that's very important as well.
I'm Herb Hiller from DeLand. I wonder if we have any data, Dr. Steiner, maybe you have, on not merely how many fatalities and accidents there are, but per number of miles ridden in the case of bikes. Is there any way to work with data that we already have and maybe extrapolate it to find out that per mile ridden we're not the worst state in America, that we might be in the middle, something of that sort, precisely because we can ride all year?
That's a great question, and what this session today has been really helpful in terms of one of the things I have written a note on already is that we need to think about adjusting for population, not based simply on the permanent population of the state, but really begin to adjust it, thinking about how many people are here as visitors, and the recreational part. The exposure data is really tricky, although I know that with social media there's starting to be opportunity, and there are apps where certain groups of bicyclists, and the tricky part is it is a biased sample, but where people are reporting all of their bicycling, and you could in fact begin to aggregate that data to look at that, although I think that's far from a complete source of data, but certainly, I mean, one of the things I'm serious about is looking at and adjusting simply for visitors and seeing where our numbers come out compared to other places would be a good first start. Where we might have to do the same adjustments for other states, but I don't want to. I probably am not. That may be more than I want to bite off.
Qatar is one of 10 university transportation centers in the nation, and I was at a meeting about a month ago at the U.S. Department of Transportation where all the universities got together, and one of the hot topics was how to develop a national standard for vehicle miles traveled for bicycles. And they don't quite know how to do that yet, but they're working on it. And a lot of the universities, a big topic of their research is exposure, so they're trying to figure out ways to measure bicycle exposure, and a lot of them have research projects that are working on that, and we're doing some things at Qatar also, but that is on the top of their list to come up with a national standard. They just have not figured out how to do that yet, but I think that we'll be seeing that soon.
I'm not looking to jimmy the figures, but I have heard ever since Dan Burden came to town about 35 years ago, that we're number one, and it's terrible. But it may be that we get into a mindset and we beat this horse to the point where we can't recognize by a different way of working the data legitimately that we are not the worst state in America. I can imagine a time when, if we were really down, if we were like the number 47th state in America, where we could take a certain pride in that, and we might be able to get our realtors to tell people moving to Florida that we are really a safe state to bicycle. And in time, even tourism might be willing to take a bite out of that. We're far, far, far from it today, but I would encourage us all to continue to collect these new data. Thank you.
Dean Mims, City of Gainesville resident. I'm a little bit reluctant to ask this question, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And is there any data that would speak to rigor of driving test examination? I grew up in another state where you had to actually demonstrate you could drive and park a motor vehicle, and do it on a roadway. I'm married to somebody who grew up in a Western European country, and it's a 1 hour expensive test, road test. One mistake, you're out of there, you get to do it again. The driving behavior, at least in the Netherlands compared to here, is palpably different. But it's a whole different system, I get that. But is there any data here to suggest comparative data between states, say, where there may be more demanding drivers' licensing standards? Has that been teased out or sorted out? Just anecdotally, it seems silly to me that we so easily license people to go drive a car without demonstrating that they can actually operate a car. So I know that's maybe a little bit off to the edge of what this workshop's about, but if anybody cares to comment on that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I would point out one of the efforts associated with the funding of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation of active transportation was in fact cataloging a lot of state level policies believed to be influential in that. I would start by looking there. I doubt that they did that, it's not an area of my research, so I don't even know how much literature there even is on that, although I do know that there's studies, for instance, on graduated licensing, which I sort of consider to be in that realm, in a different aspect of that realm. So I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't something, but I don't personally know of anything.
Because the laws are done by the legislature, from what I've seen historically, there's typically been resistance to tighten up any of the laws related to driver testing. We used to require motorcyclists to wear helmets, and they went to the legislature every year for as long as I could remember until they finally got helmets. The helmet laws removed, and 30%, from what I understand, about 30% more people who are riding motorcycles that crash die as a result of head injuries. So it's a challenge.
I just wanted to add, I actually have done some research on that, and one recent study indicated that Florida now has the 6th worst drivers in the nation, which unfortunately is contributing to the discussion we're having this afternoon. And part of that reason is that Florida does a really bad job of training drivers. Florida used to do a much better job. It used to require periodic retraining of drivers. It used to require drivers ed in high schools. They stopped doing that because they felt it was too onerous a responsibility on the part of drivers. So what I would recommend to anybody that's interested in following up is to contact our drivers, our legislators rather, saying the Florida's doing a really poor job of training drivers, and as a result, people are dying.
It would be helpful if you provided the citation to that study.
Tim, maybe we could have everybody who wants to continue the conversation step forward so we can start breaking down from here.
Okay, we can do that. I'm sorry, were we in the middle?
Thank you. And just a last comment, just a thought. I'm not expecting a response to this, but it seems like there's a paucity of public service announcements, and I thought there was some requirement for a certain number with an FCC license. So it seemed to me this would take funding, of course, but there could be like driving tips, like how the law changed last year. You know, you could just blast it on the TV station. So there's a thought. I don't expect a response to it, but it's putting it out there.
Hi, I'm Joe Barnett from Tallahassee, and thanks for this great information to take back to Tallahassee. I had 3 quick questions. One is I've started taking a couple vacations in the Northeast, and a couple times in they're smaller towns, but when I walk and I'm real close to the road, all the cars stop, and I feel like I've shut down the whole transportation system. And that hasn't happened in my town, except for a lady that had a Minnesota nice license plate once. But I was wondering if it's the police that have changed that attitude, or if it's something else. And then a second question was, a student was critically injured. I don't know if he died. He was in a crosswalk in a school zone, and on the front page of the paper was safety director of the schools says we need to teach kids how to walk to school safe. And nothing about the 22-year-old driver that went through the crosswalk. So crosswalks, I have the same experience. You have drivers turning left and right trying to kill you. So the crosswalks are so dangerous that I can see why people would use mid-cross and jaywalk. So I don't know how to make the crosswalk safer. Some say maybe not have right turn on red at certain intersections. And the third question I had was, I love that information about $1 billion spent a year on the schools for busing, because I have a lot of my friends who are anti-government spending, and I like to irritate people, so I like to tell them one person, one car is the biggest welfare system in America, but I don't have the data, because I just want to let them know that you are probably the biggest welfare person I know. So anyways, if you have that data, I would love to get it. How much it really costs for one person, counting all the costs.
I'd be happy to give you some information. It's only $938 million, but
great. Well, that's the kind of stuff I
emphasizing
love
for-
to have. Thank you.
And that's only 42% of children, I think.
On the subject of crosswalks, one of the things that we're going to be doing is using more of what we call blank out signs at intersections that prohibit right on reds because of the problems we're having. It's another area that we're using our high visibility enforcement on. Bike Walk Central Florida, which you heard I'm on the board of. We're also using that to improve yielding behavior at crosswalks, whether they're at intersections or mid-block, either one.
On the right turn on red, I had a student who did a simple paper looking at 4 intersections in Gainesville. And she was a linguistics major and made a really important point, which is that we say no right turn on red and say, instead of saying stop, then proceed on red. What she did find was that the rate of compliance to pedestrian right-of-way was significantly higher at the intersections in all classes of behavior, including some people still turned right on red when they were not allowed to. But at the 2 intersections that had no right turn on red, the rate of compliance of pedestrian right-of-way was significantly higher in the places that did not have it.
And I have something that adds to that. And basically, I don't know the exact number, but about 50% of the time, the at-fault person in a pedestrian automobile collision or a bicycle automobile collision, 50% it's the motorist, 50% it's the bicyclist or the pedestrian. So there's behaviors on both sides that are not, people aren't behaving properly. And the 2 groups basically are disrespecting each other. So there's a lot of work to do with motorists and with bicyclists and pedestrians, and teaching them how to travel by the rules of the road.
I think we can only go one more. We've gone our 30 minutes. So Linda, if you want to jump up.
First thing, just informationally on exposure. Bike Florida, every year I would turn in a report to DOT that there were 1,000 riders riding 360 miles. That's 360,000 road miles with no injuries. So I think we have a way using the bike events that we do, the bike clubs, to do some handle on exposure. And I think some of that exposure we'll find is actually not where our problem lies, but at least it gives some concept of that. Second thought was law enforcement. I strongly believe they have to be a major player, and I see the potential for DOT's funded community traffic safety teams, which work on a local basis with a team. Law enforcement is a huge part of that, and they keep talking about data, but in a very general way. And I think that if they could be given the tools on a local basis as part of the community traffic safety team to say, what is your safety problem in bicycle pedestrian arena? Go look at those hot spots, decode your crashes, and find out what it is, and then come up with a solution. That would be a way to really target it. The community traffic safety teams have so much potential, but they right now are a poster kind of distribution center. So I think I'd like to see that happen.
Well, and that's one of the roles of the bike ped safety program managers, is to focus specifically on bike and ped crashes. So they're the person that are leading those efforts in each of the districts now. We didn't have those.
If they could be a little more empowered to
Right.
focus on that data
That's
locally.
understood.
And John, the bicycle pedestrian safety could work with graduated licensing with the bike ped program with an incentive that if you pass the bicycle pedestrian safety program and training, you'd get a 1-up to get your driver's license. Perhaps you could get it 6 months earlier, or you could get it at a reduced rate, but some incentive program to involve that would be good. And finally, behavior. This is what I use, and I ride, and the truck drivers say, "Oh, cool, I saw you, lady." So, part of it is on the part of the riders, to be seen, to be visible, to be pleasant, and using the road. So thank you very much for all of your input and effort.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I'm afraid our time is up. Thank you all for sticking it out. Thank you to our panelists. It's been an awesome session.